Hey there, welcome back. Today we are talking about our next linkage institution, which is elections. And we're going to start off with topic 5.8, electing a president. In this lesson, you will learn the steps to a presidential election. So let's get started. Running for president has 4 main basic steps. But this process is a really long process in the United States. As you can tell on the chart, the United States actually has one of the longest election processes for our head of state. Our election process starts over a year in advance, the spring of the year before the election. So for the 2020 election, the election actually began in 2019. Let's start off with our very first step, which is primary elections and caucuses. Primary elections are elections that are held to determine who will represent the party in an election. During primaries and caucuses, candidates go up against members of their own party, not against members of the opposite party. There are 3 main types of primaries that you should know. There are closed primaries, where only registered party members can vote. Open primaries, where anyone can vote for any candidate, but you can only choose one of the primaries, so either the Republican or the Democratic primary. And then there are blanket primaries, where you can vote for anyone on any ballot for any of the primaries. Georgia holds open primaries, so when you walk up on a primary election day, you actually have to choose which ballot you are going to use, either Democrat, Republican, or Independent. Some states hold caucuses, which are meetings where members of the party can meet to try to determine who they think they want to represent them in the general election. During a caucus, members actually vote with their feet, and representatives for each candidate actually try to convince people to choose their side. Caucuses take a really long time and are actually moving out of favor. Currently, there are really only 2 states that use caucuses, Iowa and Nevada. What candidates are fighting for during the primaries and caucuses are to actually win delegates. Each state has a certain number of delegates within that party, and the candidate with the most delegates by the time they reach the national convention gets to actually be the party's nominee. Delegates are earned mostly by winning primaries and caucuses. In the Democratic Party, there are superdelegates or unbound delegates. These superdelegates or unbound delegates are not won by winning a primary or a caucus. These delegates are won simply by whatever they decide they want to do. In the last couple of years, however, in the Democratic Party in particular, superdelegates have been given less power within the Democratic Party. Once all of the delegates have been won, then a candidate will win the party's nomination. The party has a big convention in the summer right before the election. And at that convention, the delegates from all around the country come together and they announce who they are voting for, who they are representing, who they want to be the party's candidate for the general election. At that national convention, you will see speeches from lots of members of the party, former presidents, former office holders, and then typically you will have a huge celebration at the end once the nominee has been announced and chosen. Once a nominee has been named for a political party, none of the other candidates who have run can run on that party's ticket. Those candidates could go and run for a third party. However, most of the time they don't. The reason they don't is because if they run as a third party, they will end up splitting their party's ticket and almost guaranteeing the other party a win in the Electoral College. Finally, you have to win the general election. This is the only step where candidates are actually running against a member of the opposite party. Throughout the rest of the process, they are only going up against members of their own party. There are 8 campaign strategies that candidates use when running for election. First is during the primaries, and they energize their base. They energize the people who are already members of their party and who are already excited about the main platform ideals of that party. This time frame will highlight the more extreme parts of their platform. So for Democrats, it would be things like the Green New Deal or Medicare for All. For Republicans, it would be things like Build the Wall. Once a candidate has won their party's nomination, however, they typically tend to pivot. And what that does is that means that they can turn slightly towards the middle and moderate their ideas. The reason that they do this is so that they can garner support from more central voters, because that's where most of the voters who are undecided are going to come from. The next strategy is to frame your opponent or create a cohesive narrative for the electorate about who your opponent is. Donald Trump did a very good job of this in 2016 in framing Hillary Clinton as someone who nobody wanted to vote for. The 2016 election turned out to be one where more people were voting against a particular candidate than really voting for a particular candidate. Next, a candidate has to pick their running mate. They have to pick the person who is going to be their vice president. Now, the person who is going to be vice president has to be qualified to be president, so it can't be a former president. But they also need to make sure that they are preserving party unity and that they are balancing the ticket. So this means if the candidate themselves is more on the extreme of their party, either farther left or farther right, then they're going to want to pick somebody who is more in the center in order to balance the ticket. And the same is true for the opposite way. If the candidate is fairly central, then they're going to want to pick somebody who is a little further out on the political spectrum than they are. The running mate's job is really to be an advocate for the candidate. Their job is to boost the candidate up, to get people excited about the candidate. And they can act as an attack dog so that it allows the candidate to seem more presidential. Next, you have fundraising. And candidates for office have to be very good fundraisers. And this is something that you actually have to be doing throughout the entire election cycle. You also have to make sure that you are spending that money wisely, that you are going to be able to make that money last all the way through the November election. And you have to use polling wisely, like we talked about in Unit 4. Let's move on and talk about the Electoral College a little bit, because while voters and the popular vote matters, the really important part of the presidential election is the Electoral College. The Electoral College is created by the Constitution, and it says that each state shall appoint in such a manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors. Each state gets the same number of electors as they have members of Congress, and the state legislature within each state gets to decide how those electors are chosen. Typically, each state has 2 sets of electors. They have a Democratic set of electors and a Republican set of electors. And whoever wins the popular vote in that state, those electors are the ones who actually get to go and vote on the day that the Electoral College votes, which is later in December. Don't forget the 12th Amendment. The 12th Amendment did change the Electoral College just a little bit. Originally, the person who won the most Electoral College votes became president, and the person who had the second most became vice president. With the 12th Amendment, we changed it so that presidents and vice presidents ran together, so we didn't end up having a president and a vice president from different parties. Remember, each state gets the same number of electors as they have members of Congress. This means that there are 538 Electoral College votes. In order to win the presidency, you have to have a majority, not a plurality. Remember the difference between those two. A majority is over 50%. So the number of electors required to win the White House is 270. Here you can actually see the current number of electoral college votes that each state gets. The most electoral college votes a state has currently is 55, and that's California. The smallest number of electors a state can have is 3, because every state gets 2 senators and at least 1 member in the House of Representatives. Each party within a state really gets to choose their own electors. Many times it will be prominent members of the party within that state. So in 2020, Hillary Clinton was actually an elector in the state of New York. Stacey Abrams was an elector in 2020 in the state of Georgia. The only requirement for an elector is that they cannot be a current employee of the federal government. Each state's electors meet in their respective state and cast their votes in December. In 2020, it was on December 14th. Those electoral votes are then sealed and sent to the Senate, where they are read aloud, and that happens on January 6th. The candidate with at least 270 electoral votes is then declared president. However, if no candidate gets at least 270 votes, then the House of Representatives has to go in and choose who they want to be president. This isn't every member gets a vote. It is each state delegation gets 1 vote. In this lesson, you should have learned the steps to the presidential election. If there's anything you missed, go back now and re-watch that part of the video. Then, make sure to answer the summarizing question in your notes so that you can get a stamp the next time we're in class. All right, guys, we'll see you later. Bye.